I think we should probably get started. I don't know how many people are on here exactly, but
14.
14. It's a good start, right?
Hey.
There we go. Hi, everybody. I am thrilled you're here. We're all thrilled you're here. My name is Jamie McGonnigal. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Outvote. Before this, I was at SOCAP, which is a conference for impact investors and social entrepreneurs. And before that, I ran Roots Camp for the New Organizing Institute for about 5 years, and then worked with what is now Repower the following year after that to help out with Roots Camp then. I also have with me, yes, Malcolm, this is our son Malcolm, who is watching Bluey, and he has got his spicy water, which is known as seltzer in our world. And so we may be interrupted. Either Sean, who's wearing the matching shirt, may be interrupted, or I will be. So without further ado, we are here to talk about making an organizer, converting clicks into impact. We're going to tackle some fun questions, I hope. We're talking about what does it take to go from reading an email to taking a text, or text to taking an action. Every year, millions of volunteers help create change by taking action both on and offline. In this panel, we'll hope to discuss their takeaways and strategies for converting members into action. Topics will include handling differences in originating channels and user intent, conducting experiments on user engagement, crafting authentic messages, volunteer follow-up, and building community online. Community is my favorite word in the world. I love how we build community, both in my work and in my life. And these are all people that I know on this panel who do an excellent job of building their own communities up and doing great things in the world. So I want to be cognizant of the time and know that we have a limited amount of time to talk. So please make sure you share your questions in the Q&A as we go through. Please be respectful as you do so. We will do our best to get to all the questions. And also, if you want to share your Twitter handles, if you want to share your email addresses, and there are questions left over, we will be happy to reach out to you and answer any of those questions that you have. So if you can maybe put your email address along with a question when you post it, that would be very helpful for us. So I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have Michael Crawford, who is the cultural director at Move On, Emily Dasilva, who is the COO of Outvote, Sean Carlson, who's the founder of Apollo Collaborative, and Arianna Trujillo-Wesler, who's the founder of Open Fields. And I'm going to pass it off to them. Friends, as I call on you, can you please tell us your pronouns, a little more about what brings you here today, and say the thing you most like about me. Just kidding. Tell us what your October surprise would be. What's one weird fact about you that would either make or break your campaign if you were running? So let me start with Emily.
You need to put me on the spot. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Dasilva. My pronouns are she, her, hers. As Jamie mentioned, I'm the COO at Outvote. And my favorite thing about Jamie is that he puts up with my terrible jokes and niche references all the time, and still pretends to like me through it.
You don't actually have to say that part.
Oh. Okay. I'm sure I'll tell you all about relational organizing and friend-to-friend organizing through our conversation, but my work is primarily in making sure friends are holding their friends accountable to get out the vote. And my October surprise, I guess, I don't know that this would compromise a campaign, but I have a very photographic memory, and I remember the lyrics of almost every song I've ever heard. I just have to hear it once, and I know most all the words. So my brain is full of lyrics.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Ari, how about you?
Hi. Arianna Trujillo-Wesler, she, they pronouns, coming from Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, California. And one of the co-founders of Open Field. I think the best way to describe who we are is that we're an organizing toolkit that lets folks canvass or make phone calls and seamlessly register voters from wherever they are. And Actually, I have an answer to the Jamie question. So my favorite thing about Jamie is actually the pictures he posts of Malcolm and the way that he loves Malcolm as he's growing up, and it's great. It's really wonderful. And my October surprise would almost, and I don't think it would actually hurt me if I ever ran for office with who I assume my base would be, but that I've had an FBI file since I was 10 years old. Yeah, that's it.
That's a good one. I now want to know what's in it. All right, Michael.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Michael Crawford. I am Cultural Director for Move On. My pronouns are he, him, his. I come to you from the greatest city in the world, New York, which is not me saying it. It was a line from a Broadway musical that won lots of Tonys, so it has to be true. So my work is actually at the intersection of culture, storytelling, and social change. So I get to do the fun stuff and try to do what Tony Cade Bambara said about making the revolution irresistible. The thing that I love most about Jamie is actually what Ari said, how much he loves Malcolm, which is amazing and so evident in everything he does. And I didn't just say that because I'm trying to suck up. It's actually true. And I think I have not had an FBI file since I was 10 years old that I know of. But I think the kind of October surprise that I would like is a surprise collaborative album between Madonna and Beyonce. And that would totally change the pop cultural landscape for me and hence change the nature of my work.
I like it. I like it. And finally, my lovely husband, Sean.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Carlson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the founder of Apollo Collaborative, which is a digital organizing and training practice. I am here today. I love this topic because I am actually the living embodiment of this topic. I am actually only in politics because I happened to fill out a form on mybarackobama.com in 2007, and somebody actually called me, which I was shocked that happened. And that started my journey into becoming a professional organizer and falling in love with using the internet for this purpose. And I kind of remember that every time I kind of bring that experience into everything I do. I'm not answering that question about Jamie because I think everyone should know exactly why I love him, especially if you follow us on the internet. And I think my October surprise would be there is no October surprise. Plot twist, everything is going to go as expected because in my world, things go according to plan.
Never going along with the questions.
No, never.
Yeah, that's why we're married. So I'm going to dive into a question for y'all, and my son is going to be right here while I do it. So a question that I would like to ask y'all to start. We all depend on community. It's what causes action. It's what inspires change, and it's what gives us hope. How do we create authentic virtual community that ignites the spark we need right now? And let me throw that over to Michael first.
Sure. I think, so the work that I'm focused on right now is really aimed at a category of people that we're calling high potential voters, right? Like usually when you hear political pundits talking about young people, talking about people of color, low-income people, first-time voters, they refer to them/us as low-propensity voters. We see them as having high potential. And so when I'm thinking a lot about community, I'm thinking a lot about younger folks and people of color. And I think the name of the game in terms of building community is authenticity and vulnerability. I think that especially right now when everything seems rigged and there is a kind of a mood of cynicism in the air because, not just because of the last 3.5 years under, the occupant of the White House, but also because of decades-long attempts by Republicans to undermine our trust in government. And so I think for us, a lot of what I'm thinking about right now is how do we create content and ads that don't look like political ads? because if you look at political ads, they tend to all look the same. Even the stuff that, you know, like the Lincoln Project is doing, which everybody is raving about. You can spot it like as a political ad from a mile away. And so the way that I'm thinking about it right now and around building community is around art and creativity and culture. Because, you know, politics, and this isn't my quote, this is someone, Yossi Serjant, who's an amazing cultural strategist, has said that, you know, politics is where some of the people are some of the time, culture is where all of the people are all of the time. And so I think when we think about culture, storytelling, authenticity, those are real ways to build community, especially in a moment that is as cynical as the moment we're living in right now.
That's excellent. I appreciate that. Ari.
Thank you for that, Michael. And I've been projecting what a Beyonce Madonna like retrospective would look like. I think I keep going back to something I actually learned from outside of organizing, which is like that the core unit of everything we do, whether it's organizing, relationship building, or the things that shatter like the shields of loneliness, right? Because I think that's also one of the things that's also very true about our time is people feel more isolated and disconnected from each other than they ever had. And I think that was like true before like we've talked about like digital segregation and all that sort of good stuff. That was true before the pandemic. And I think it really hit home in a huge way once actually folks were actually like also physically isolated from each other. And so one of the things that I was taught outside of organizing practice, but which is actually something that saved my life, is the core unit of everything we're doing is one person connecting authentically to another person, right? And that to me has become the core unit of building power, as well as just like, but it starts with shattering loneliness and actually starting with being able to identify my humanity with your humanity and why I'm here with why you're here. Kind of going to what Michael is saying, so much of our outreach has become very kind of cookie cutter. It feels the same, right? Like I can snap open a text from a number I've never seen before, and I can tell when it's coming to me from someone who got my number through a thing and is just reaching out to me cold versus somebody who is doing it through a P2P text program. I can tell immediately because of the way the script feels. And so I think one of the things that I invite for folks to think about when they're thinking about P2P texting programs or thinking about using relational programs like Outvote that pre-program a script for you, or even just thinking about the phone calls that we have with folks as we're talking more on the phone these days, is how are we actually connecting authentically to folks and actually putting our humanity, right, and trying to share like in the same way we do when we're standing on a street corner trying to organize with folks, right? Like, how do I connect the reason why I'm here with the reason why you're here? And to discover the reason why you're here, is discover the reason why you care, and loop all of those things back together. So there's an opportunity for humanity to lead first. And that is the way we do one-to-one, but I think it scales out in digital. And the best digital practices I've seen, exactly like Sean is talking about, that was also how I got into political organizing, was because I filled in a MyBo form and someone called me and told me I should come to Chicago, right? And I was like, cool. And so like that conversation changed my life. And I think that when we're talking about good digital, right, authentic storytelling grips out and reaches out to you. Good art reaches out and grips to you at the level of your humanity. And so I think it's really critical that we think about everything, whether it's digital organizing, distributed organizing, or just our old school one-to-one field contacts, that we're thinking about humanity and vulnerability and authentic connection first. Yeah.
That was perfect and wonderful. Thank you. And Malcolm is showing you bingo and Bluey. Sean, I'd like to jump over to you.
Yeah. So thank you, Michael and Arianna, for those comments. When I think about creating a community online, especially in a community of people that we want to take action, I think about what it feels like on the other end, being a recipient of these communications, right? Like being in digital, I always like to remind myself and others that there's a human being on the other end of every tweet, email, text, Facebook post, what have you. And those people are also in authentic communities that, like in their neighborhoods. And the same principles actually apply when you're doing either community organizing in person, or you just are a part of community. And communities are based around many more pillars than this, but like in the digital context, I think of it in three main ways: around shared values, around shared identity, and shared experiences. And each of those are difficult to create online, but there are some ways to do it. You know, for example, you know, shared experiences, like being a part of an online activist community might be, you know, sharing in a victory, and you know, building that community might look like reporting back out on a victory after you've won something. Creating a shared sense of identity might look like visual cues, you know, like exactly like what we're doing right now on this panel, right? Like, you wouldn't know just by looking at our sort of Brady Bunch faces that Jamie and I are actually in the same house right now, right? But like those visual identity markers kind of like give you an indication that there is some sense of cohesion here. You know, think about like people wearing the same shirts at rallies, things like that, just those like identity markers that create a sense of community out of nothing. And then also, you know, shared values that make people sort of understand what is it that you are about when you send them an email, right? Or you send them a text. And I like to be as explicit as possible and reinforce those values so that, you know, sort of no matter where you are in the constellation of actions that people are asking you to take, you sort of have, you know, some guiding principle. And those things, I think, together are what are also the building blocks of authenticity, right? People can tell the difference between being in like a fake community online, or people that just use the word, or one that is actually really real. And for me, the real ones, you know, tend to have some of those similar building blocks, like, right, like shared experiences, shared identities, and shared values. And those are possible to, they're still possible to communicate online.
Great, thanks very much. I like that, the shared identity piece, the shared is any time in this, especially in this time where we feel so isolated. I think we need those markers. We need those things that bring us together in some way. And it feels silly almost to say, oh, you're all wearing the same shirt, or you all showed up to the same Zoom call and therefore you're a community. But it's what we need right now. Emily, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. And also, all of your answers to this align with what I believe about community. And I want to echo something that Ari shared that I think is really extraordinary and is the root of why I got into organizing, which is storytelling. I think that stories are the most human way with which we can communicate with each other. And I also think that stories bring out an empathy and, as Ari said, a human connection that are the fundamental core of a community. But in order to tell stories, we have to have dialogues. And as Sean was saying, and Michael a bit too, echoing that these are people having dialogues is really important. And on top of that, having a general fearlessness about starting dialogues from a respectful and kind place is the most important part of stepping into this work, because dialogues can be intimidating. Dialogues with strangers over the internet, often publicly, can be intimidating, especially with the threat of bots or, sometimes worse, conservatives. And the fearlessness with which you need to enter a conversation has to be first and foremost in starting to make bridges in an online community. But I just want to echo what others have said about vulnerability, storytelling, trust, fearlessness. And I do think that trust and respect are the backbone of community. So thank you all for laying the groundwork for that.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer. I'd like to jump over to my next question, but also remind people watching that you can leave messages. You can leave messages in the chat, but there's a QA button at the bottom of the whole Zoom window. You can enter questions there, and we're happy to answer those as we move ahead. Again, please leave your email address with your question, just in case we don't get to it, and we'll reach out to you after the panel. But we don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to move on to my next one. So my next question is, considering we're all being pulled in so many different directions and our attention is so limited, and Zoom calls were cute at one point, but we're all a little over it, let's be honest. How do you get people's attention, and how do you get them to do something meaningful once you have it? Let me start with Emily on this one.
Thank you. I really like this question because I feel like this is the work that I get to do day in and day out. And for me, the best way to mobilize people is and excite people and keep them engaged is through people they know and love and people whose opinions they trust. We start with the foundation of building community, but once we have that community in place and we know how to tap into a community through effective storytelling and dialogue, this is where you can keep the conversation sustained around the members of the community so that at all corners, the people in the community around the target you're trying to reach are surrounded by the talking points, the issues of importance, the accessible ways of thinking through the problems in the immediate world around them, and the tangible solutions that they can engage in themselves to keep going. And I think it all is rooted in the chatter they're hearing. So if they are receiving messages from trusted sources, they are more likely to stay engaged and stay excited on the topic. And I'm seeing a lot of nods, so I'll let the other panelists jump in on that.
Yeah, Ari, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I think there's two things that break through the noise, right? Like one is messenger and the other one is content itself. So like, is it like visually engaging from like a real baseline, right? As you're scrolling through your phone, does this catch your eye, right? Like I'm thinking about things that stand out and are really distinct looking. Like as an example, the trailer for Judas and the Black Messiah like stopped me hard in my tracks instantly, like the second I saw it, and immediately gripped me from the moment I saw it. And I was like shaking afterwards. And then I felt a need to talk about it with other people, right? And so there's like the content that can inspire people. There's messengers that can inspire folks. And so one of those is like, you can have trusted messengers who sometimes you don't hear about politics. Like Cardi B is a great example, right? Who will talk about politics and get political, right? In a way that's really unapologetic. But like I stopped to hear what Cardi B is doing regardless of what she's talking about. And then I think the other thing is like having a really compelling message, right? So there's the actual visualization of the content, but also like, what are you saying, right? Like, does the thing itself break through kind of what we're talking about in a way that actually snatches people? And I think all of those mechanisms for gathering attention, right? You really have to do something with that attention you have to earn the right to motivate someone to take action, right? And so can you actually connect the thing you're asking them to do with like a problem they're trying to solve, right? Or with a stance that you're inviting them to take, right? Or what can you actually tell the story of that clearly and succinctly so that it doesn't just feel like I'm signing another change.org petition that goes into the ether and is not going to do anything, right? Like I think it's also really important to just acknowledge for our base of folks the same way that Zoom calls were cute at the beginning of this. Like I feel like petitions were really cute like 6 years ago, right? And now we're at a point where, and like a lot of our tactics that we've historically used, like call your member of Congress, right? Like all of those things we're kind of zapped out of them, right? And so, and maybe we aren't, but like people are looking for ways in which to feel like the thing they're going to do is meaningful. And so I think that also invites us to get creative about the things that we're asking folks to do. I think we oftentimes defer to a lower ask, right? That is like kind of collectivist, right? Versus asking folks to do something that is more meaningful and substantial. And I think we're increasingly seeing folks, if you give them, right, if you earn with their attention the right to organize them in a meaningful way, those folks will take that action that is more meaningful. And even sometimes, as we've seen with like the uprising that's been going on throughout the summer that's been led by the Movement for Black Lives, right? People are willing to even lay down their bodies on the line if we're very clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and you've earned the right to organize them such that they believe in your leadership and they believe in the thing you're asking them to do.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Sean?
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. That was actually pretty much exactly what I wanted to say, because on my notes. So I think first, actually building off of that point, we, in this moment that we find ourselves in, are increasingly relying on the infrastructure that's built around these tactics, right? And the efficacy of them is predicated on us being good stewards of that, right? So like, we're seeing sort of the dilution of these tactics from things like, bullshit final notice emails that like, yeah, that might get you to open the email and it might get you to give a couple bucks to someone. But, as you said, like once you've gotten them gotten their attention, you know, are you actually putting meaningful actions in front of them? And are you doing things that sort of dilute our ability to like sustain people's trust? And so I think starting with things to not do, you know, is that, right? I think there are examples out there of people who don't engage in those tactics, but can sustain the attention of an activist space through that kind of authenticity. And I think that authenticity starts with two primary things. One, you know, putting relevant and timely actions in front of people. You know, that is actually, I think, a good indicator of whether an action is going to be successful. Is this something that's happening in the real world? And is there actually something you can do about it? Which is the second piece that we were just talking about. You know, are you actually giving people meaningful actions they can take online? And I actually want to take that a step further and unpack what that meaning looks like. So I think people, because we're inundated with these asks, people can spot, you know, that bullshit from a mile away. And it's very easy for someone to say, okay, in your example, Arianna, change.org petition, is this really going to do anything, right? Am I actually going to see some change from this? And I think, you know, presenting people with a roadmap of like, what is, like, does this mean this action you take actually contribute to some greater whole? Is it likely to actually be successful? And then the flip side of that is also, and I think the vast majority of people who do online organizing forget to do this part. Win or lose, actually following up with those people to let them know what happened, right? Because every time you do that, you'll have sort of on a grand scale, the same kind of effect that two of us on this panel had, which is, oh my God, people are actually paying attention to this. Wait, this was real the whole time, right? Like that someone actually took the time to follow up with me and let me know the result, right? And that means the next time I'm much more likely to take action with you. And again, that community is kind of built over a series of those actions in those relationships, right? Like meaningful ask, follow up, meaningful ask, victory, follow up, right? And over time, you are actually building an audience of people who believe in what you say. And when you tell them to do something, they're going to do it. That's actually what like community looks like in the context of mass digital organizing, right? It's all based on trust, which is built out over time. Again, other people will fuck with that trust by doing, you know, the tactics that we on this call know are not good stewards of this. But for us in our organizing, I think, you know, we have a responsibility to do that, and it's possible still to do that in this time.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up that I'll start with Michael with this same question you can answer, and then if you can follow up by sharing any examples you've had. Someone mentioned in the chat, Savannah Hughes mentioned, would love to hear any examples from the panelists about where meaningful actions they took suggested were a success. So Michael, if you start with that and your answer to the first question and any examples you might have, and then we'll jump around if anyone has any they can think of.
Sure. My first thing was my first immediate thought around how to gain people's attention is to have Malcolm in the Zoom screen with you, because I admit that I am riveted by his facial expressions, his gestures, what he's doing, so much so that when Sean cursed, I was like, language. So I think that you know, the part that Ari made about being visually arresting is incredibly important. And so part of the work that I'm doing at Move On right now is a campaign called Your Vote is Power, which is really about how to combat the disinformation narratives that are targeting specifically younger folks and people of color that tells them that their votes don't count, their votes don't matter. And it is a cultural program that's centered around art, GIFs and memes, and video. So like visual content that's really designed to not look like ads, that's to look really cool and interesting. And we're seeing some good success with that. One of the GIFs that we created in partnership with Into Action as of last week had over 100 million views, which is great, because a part of the goal of the program is to create a culture of voting that motivates and inspires people to make sure that they register to vote and then turn out, of course, in November. And as Sean was talking, he actually used the word roadmap. And it reminded me of some work that we did when I worked at Freedom to Marry, where I was director of digital and creative. We actually had our roadmap to victory strategy, which was a really simplified 3-track strategy for how we would win marriage. win marriage in more states, grow public support, and end federal marriage discrimination. And every communication that we sent out, whether it was the president of the organization talking to Anderson Cooper on CNN, or we were posting something to Facebook or sending out an email, we were always connecting it back to one of those three tracks so that people actually saw how the actions that we were asking them to take was leading us to the victory that we wanted to achieve. And the way that we thought about it was not that we needed to win marriage in every single state in order to set the context for the Supreme Court to give us the ultimate victory, but that we needed to win marriage in a critical mass of states and build a critical mass of public support. And so at the same time that we were working to win marriage in states like here in New York where I live now, or in Colorado, we were also running campaigns like Texas for Marriage, which is Texas being my home state, which were giving people real things that they could do as well. And so the way that we thought about it is every single action we were asking people to take, whether it was share this to Facebook or have this conversation with people in your family who may have questions, or call this member of Congress or this legislator in your home state, or show up at this rally as we were anticipating court decisions around marriage, were all tied to that roadmap to victory. And I think one of the opportunities that we have as a progressive movement is to get much clearer about what it is that we actually want to accomplish. There was an op-ed in the New York Times, I think it was last year, that was called The Democrats' Complexity Problem, which was all about how we on the liberal progressive left end of the spectrum, oh my God, we like to talk in facts and figures and data and citations and long, tremendously long emails. And I know it sounds hypocritical of me to talk smack about long emails, and I work for Move On, but that's just how things go. And we make things super complicated for people, when I think that if we can make things as simple as like the Freedom to Marry Roadmap to Victory, where it's really about winning marriage in more states, growing public support, and the ending federal marriage discrimination, and showing people how everything they do, from making a donation to sending a tweet to calling a legislator, fits into that bigger strategy. In other words, show themselves as agents of change, as someone said in the chat, then that will really inspire people and get them excited and optimistic about the possibilities, instead of so much of what we see right now, which is really about just screaming about problems.
Excellent. Yeah, Michael, I remember, I think it was Courage Campaign, and I think Freedom to Marry as well worked on this. There was a study on messaging around marriage specifically, and the fact that people got tied up when they would start using the word rights and listing those rights that we don't have as gay couples. But the second we started talking about love and that capacity to do so, people started turning to our side and understanding things in a way that made more sense to them. So initially, the marriage movement, we talked a lot about the right to marry or gay marriage, and the roughly 1,400 federal benefits that came with marriage, which is not how, honestly, the straight people that we needed to win over thought about marriage. So there was a lot of research, crunching of data, testing in the field and online. And we ended up coming to the very simple message of love, commitment, family, right? And talking about marriage in terms of the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And when we simplified that, that opened up space for people to actually reevaluate their opinions. And it was especially helpful to have, for example, public evolutions on marriage, such as President Obama, who came out for marriage in May of 2012. But basically what he was doing, he was performing an evolution on his stand, which gave a lot of other people permission to reevaluate what they were thinking. And he talked about it in the context of love and family and commitment, and not in the context of federal rights or benefits. Right, and that also speaks to the storytelling piece that Emily was talking about, and how that story, when people share their stories, it brings that authenticity to the message that everyone's been talking about. Anyone else have any other examples of when you've had success with any of these tactics that you've used, any of the actions that you've taken? Just feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and start talking.
I was going to say, I would love to jump in about the storytelling aspect. And Michael, I think everything you just shared is so powerful. So I definitely take a lot away from that, and thank you. I also want to call out to Adam Greenberg in the chat, who shared Ari's line about earning the right to organize. And I think where this all comes sort of 360 and together, piggybacking off of what Michael was sharing, is within that storytelling dynamic, meeting the audience where they are is a huge part of coming up with the tangible ways of how you're going to reach the audience and how you're going to earn the right to mobilize them and get their buy-in. And just a specific example of this that came to me is at Alva, we have the privilege of working with Planned Parenthood and all of their national affiliates. And back in the beginning of COVID, Texas very famously excluded abortion from essential care as part of the health care provided during this crisis. And obviously Planned Parenthood and many other groups across the country were really outraged by this. So one of the ways we worked with them was, in effect, to meet the Texas audience where they are. A lot of you also probably remember at the beginning of quarantine, there was an internet trend of people feeling, rightly so, lonely and isolated and having a desire to call their exes. And the campaign, or Planned Parenthood, ran a campaign to the effect of, don't call your ex, call the governor. And by meeting the people in Texas where they are in this moment, recognizing this is maybe what you're feeling right now, and here's a productive way to channel that energy, ended up getting the governor to include abortion as essential care in this crisis. And other states followed suit as soon as Texas did. Iowa followed shortly thereafter. And a lot of this all was predicated on recognizing the actual recipient of the story rather than just the story I want to tell because I feel like telling it. And if there's one thing I have learned in storytelling across the board, it's always about meeting your audience and lifting them up, letting them feel empowered by the story you're telling rather than talking at them. And I do think that that is a major difference between progressives and conservatives. Progressives have a very wonderful tendency of exercising that empathy in storytelling. And just as another quick anecdote to that point, when we are telling these stories and meeting our audiences, I also always recognize that, as I think Ari was sharing before and Sean mentioned this as well, stories merit follow-up. And sometimes the recipients of the stories, or even the carriers of the stories, I'm using stories broadly. So we can think of the stories as content, we can think of the stories in whatever way the message is reaching the recipient. But I think that the carriers of the messages don't always necessarily feel empowered with follow-up. And follow-up is really what fosters and solidifies the dialogue and makes people feel like they're part of the ongoing narrative. So equipping your story carriers or your content carriers with the follow-up they need, should a troll come in with a comment, or should someone say, actually, I need a link for that. How do I get that? Asking the singular question or prompting the question as part of the initial outreach is not enough. Having that follow-up prepared, whether it's having the voter registration link at the ready based on the county that the person you're speaking to is in, and then having the vernacular to follow up with them and let your volunteers feel empowered to follow up with them because they have the words they need to continue carrying out the story, is what 10 out of 10 will make an effective impression. So with that, don't call your ex, call the governor, Planned Parenthood was able to follow up with everyone they spoke to say, thank you so much for doing this. Now help advocate for this in this arena, or now make sure that you're familiar with the way your local elected official has voted on abortion access, or make sure that you have these things in your queue to advocate for this access for yourself and for others.
Sean, I saw a lot of nodding. Say more.
I was just like, I'm thinking about the follow-up piece, and like thinking about the times in which the reason it works is because it's unexpected. In the same way, like the visual arresting creative cuts against the grain, I think that follow-up also cuts against the grain. The default expectation, even among all the people on this panel, would be that people aren't going to follow up, and when you do, it's surprising. It kind of interjects a little bit, and kind of brands do this all the time, right? Like, you ever think about, like, you know, the shopping cart that follows you, or, you know, I left a nasty comment on an ad I got once, and the brand actually followed up with me, right? Like, I was not expecting that. It kind of stopped me cold. And an example of that in an organizing context, recently, I work with an organization that is dedicated to providing information about voting from home, which is in state by state, and has been doing this since the beginning of the pandemic. And as you can imagine, it's very confusing and very hyper localized, and people have a lot of questions. And so, you know, we've done things as simple as, you know, just running a Facebook ad that says, we are going to be here to answer your questions. So the ad itself becomes a Q&A, and actually following up with every single solitary one of those questions from a trusted source, a trusted non-criminal source, to provide people with that kind of information. And, you know, I think as an example of that, you know, we were able to provide a ton of information to people who had questions about it, right? And we knew that most of those people were in that state, right? So something as simple as, I don't think it requires massively overhauling your digital program either, or coming up with the most groundbreaking tactics. It can be something as simple as making sure to do the extra step of monitoring comments on a Facebook ad, right? Or, you know, segmenting out the group of people who opened an email to follow up with them. Like, it doesn't have to be this massive, grandiose thing. I think for most of the people that are watching, a lot of that stuff might feel too advanced, or feel like your program is not sophisticated enough for that. But you know, that follow up can actually be a lot more simple and very effective when you can do it.
Thank you. And there's a question in the Q&A from Alyssa Hackerson from Michael. Do you see a simple roadmap to victory working for an electoral campaign as well? What are the differences there between electoral and an advocacy campaign?
So apparently Malcolm is excited by that question. So great job asking the question. So I think it's possible to do it in an electoral context, but to be honest, I haven't seen it in an electoral context. I think that, you know, a lot of times we make it more complicated than it has to be. And I think that if you look at the Republicans in the Trump campaign, for example, in 2016, it was really, their message was really simplified, right? It was make America great again. And everything from build the wall, lock her up, to all the other slogans that they ended up pushing emanated from, you know, make America great again. I think that one of the challenges for our side is to come up with that simplified kind of message and that simplified kind of roadmap. I think, or I should say, we have the opportunity to do that. And I think one of the challenges is we like to debate and discuss the nuance, and sometimes nuance isn't the best thing, especially when you're trying to come up with something as evocative as just do it. And so, you know, I think, you know, one thing that would be useful for us as, you know, campaign organizing type folks is to also look at what brands are doing and how brands are coming up with these really simple messages from which everything emanates. So like if you think, for example, the Nike Colin Kaepernick ads that came out maybe a year and a half or so ago, like what we all remember as the ad was a simple graphic that was initially posted to Twitter that was then became a promoted tweet, and it went on from there. What we may not be as aware of is that that campaign actually stretched on for 8-9 months after that. That included not just social media content, but also TV ads, web ads, brought in Serena, who is legitimately the greatest athlete of all time, and a whole bunch of other athletes that Nike works with. But it was all under that very same simple framework that they used in that initial ad. And I think that if we we're much clearer on the audiences that we're actually talking to, instead of saying, oh, we're trying to reach everybody, but be really clear, like we are trying to reach young people of color under the age of 35, just as an example, and then really go in hard on that group of people with a message that's going to be culturally relevant to them. We'll find a couple of things. We'll find that it works with that actual audience, which is, I believe, the audience that Nike was targeting with the Kaepernick ad stuff. But we'll also find that it resonates with a far larger group of people who buy into the values that are expressed in that kind of messaging. And so while I haven't seen it yet in an electoral context, except for maybe Make America Great Again, I'm optimistic that we can do it. But right now we have actually 83 days in order to do that.
Yeah, let's hurry up with that. Ari, I wanted to jump back over to you, drill down a little bit. I'd love to ask you to drill down a little bit with earning the right to organize them, comment specifically, and ask you, what is authentic messaging? What does it look like to you, and who do you think is the best messenger?
Ooh, okay. Made of thoughts. I actually have a thing about the thing Michael was just talking about. Which
Okay,
is
you can follow up with that too, sure.
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief because we have 4 minutes left. So Bob Moses, who was an organizer in SNCC, used to say, like, you have to earn the right to organize folks, specifically when he was talking about doing voter registration in Mississippi during the Freedom Summer. And so actually in an electoral context, we have a lot of parallels for this. One example actually is from like 08, which is like a kind of a bit of a throwback, but it's like the Hope Action Change like slogan. Eventually they just like abbreviated them. They're like Hope was like the thing we were talking about, which was annoying because Hope Action Change was actually very helpful, because then as field organizers on the ground, we used to be like, here are the actions that go into we get you hopeful through storytelling, and then we have this action we're going to ask you to do. It's knocking doors, it's making phone calls, it's talking to your neighbors, right? Like those are the 3 things we're going to ask you to do, right? So that we can manifest the change that we want. And so like there are different iterations of that you see across campaigns. Like in 2016, the Bernie campaign, and they did a version of this expanded again in 2020, right? Where like the biggest push was like making phone calls and sending text messages. And the biggest idea was like that you are the greatest representative for the campaign that can exist, right? And in 2020, right, like the Burn app was the primary thing they were pushing. So it was literally like organize your networks, a network at a time. Like that's how we're actually going to build, right, the movement of like not me, us, right? Like, so that sort of framing. So like, I think that there's examples that exist in an electoral context that I think are really valuable. I think the parallel that does not exist is actually more on the messaging side that Michael's describing. Like I haven't seen like the level of message discipline since the Obama era in the electoral side in a big way. And I think that's something that we have a harder job as progressives, because we're not trying to push towards nostalgia, right? We're trying to manifest a world that doesn't yet exist, right? And so that is actually a far harder job. And so I think it's actually worth being gentle with ourselves a little bit, because it's way easier to be like, remember that thing, than it is to like, callback is easier than inventing a new thing, right? And so we do have to do a better job about painting the story of the world we're trying to build. I think when it comes to like the authentic side and earning the right to organize folks, really it has to be like, why am I here? Right? I remember reading something about a now disgraced congressional candidate, and it was a question he could never answer to his staff, is like, why are you running? And I think that it's a question that we always have to answer, right? And that's like a series of alarm bells for any operative, but it's something that we, as every single organizer, advocacy campaign, candidate, needs to be able to answer. Why are you running? Why are you here? Of all the things that we could be doing that would make us more money, that would be less stressful, like, why is this the thing that we're doing, right? And so I think wearing our motivation on our sleeve is the first point, right, to explaining like who we are, and to be honest, like, why should somebody fuck with you? And then the second side of it, almost as surprising as follow-up, is the invitation to also share, because people want to be heard. right? People want to be listened to, people want to be seen. And it is actually a really humbling and incredible experience to hold people's stories for them and to earn the right to hear those stories. And so it's really important, actually, it's critical that we make space for that, right? In our work, we make space for folks to engage, for them to share, for them to connect, for them to then connect with each other, right? And that's actually, those two things combined are the things that actually start to weave communities, that start to weave trust. And then if you add some good follow-up and some action steps in there, then you can actually build like kind of the movement that you're trying to see.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. And as Sean said in the chat, we were in someone's staying with a friend, and their roommate was dating Clay Aiken, and Clay was not yet announced that they were going to run for Congress, and we asked very specifically, so why do you want to run? And he got angry with us about it. He was a little perturbed that we would even ask such a question. I was like, well, we're not going to be the only ones to ask you this if you actually want to do this. So it was interesting. But on that note, we're at time. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, for being part of the panel. It's an honor to organize with all of you. Someone once said to me, marry someone who is smarter than you. And happily I did that. And not only that, but I now get to organize with all these people who are smarter than me, and it's amazing. And y'all are brilliant, and I'm thrilled you're here. Thanks to all these attendees who showed up and listened to us talk. Thank you to Malcolm for watching Bluey for the past hour. We're thrilled. And thank you all. I think this is going to be posted, so you can watch this or share it with other people if you like. And I think all our Twitter handles are shared, so feel free to reach out to any of us and ask us questions as you go along. But great luck, great fortune to you and all your organizing to come. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Zoe, for facilitating and being our volunteer organizer.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for hosting us. Bye.